What if the hospital you work at isn't as empty as it seems? In this spine-chilling night shift, a young nurse discovers the terrifying truth about the patients she's been caring for, and what happens when she realizes she's now trapped in their dark, haunted world. It was the kind of night shift that most people dread, the ones that stretch endlessly, where every minute feels like an hour and every hour, a lifetime. Emily was no stranger to long, lonely nights at St. Thomas Hospital, a rundown facility on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't exactly a glamorous job, but it paid the bills. That was enough, right? At least that's what she kept telling herself as she stepped into the hospital's sterile lobby, her footsteps echoing against the cold, tile floor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their flickering a constant reminder that this building was ancient. It had been around for decades, longer than most of the staff had worked there, longer than any of them cared to admit. It had its share of history, some of it buried deep, locked away in the old records no one ever bothered to check. Emily glanced around the quiet lobby, her gaze briefly settling on the old clock hanging above the reception desk. 10:15 p.m. There were barely any patients in the hospital at this hour, just a handful of the truly desperate souls who had nowhere else to go. A sigh escaped her lips as she walked toward the elevator. She wasn't sure if she was more tired of the job itself or the unsettling silence that seemed to grow with every passing shift. As the elevator doors closed behind her, she pressed the button for the third floor, where the majority of the night's rounds would take place. It was the part of the hospital most people tried to avoid, the old wing that had been condemned years ago but was still used in emergencies. The halls were narrow, the rooms dark, and the air always smelled faintly of antiseptic mixed with something off. When the elevator jolted to a stop, Emily stepped out, her shoes clicking on the floor as she made her way down the corridor. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, and she could feel a strange chill creeping up her spine. She shook it off. Just nerves, nothing to worry about. Her first stop was room 312. A middle-aged man named Mr. Harris had been admitted for a simple procedure, but his condition had worsened over the last few days. She knocked softly on the door before entering. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the monitor next to his bed. "Good evening, Mr. Harris," she said in her usual professional tone. "How are you feeling tonight?" There was no response. Emily frowned, her heart skipping a beat. She knew he was alive. The monitor confirmed it, but something felt off. She took a step closer to the bed, squinting to make out his features in the dim light. The man was lying perfectly still, his eyes closed, too still. Suddenly, a faint whisper filled the room. It wasn't loud, just a soft murmur, like someone calling her name from the farthest corner of the room. "Emily. Emily." Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she didn't know whether to turn around or run, but the sound was so faint, so distant, that she convinced herself it was just the wind. A draft had probably blown through the old vents, or maybe it was the hospital's ancient air conditioning playing tricks on her ears. Shaking off the unease, she checked Mr. Harris's vitals and adjusted his forward drip. The monitor beeped steadily. Everything seemed fine, but just as she was about to leave, the whisper came again, louder this time. "Emily." She froze. The voice was unmistakable now. It was coming from the bed, no, from behind her. Her heart raced as she spun around, expecting to see someone standing there, but the room was empty. The door was still closed. She was alone. Was it just her imagination? She couldn't tell, but something didn't feel right. The atmosphere in the room felt oppressive, like the air was thicker, heavier. She needed to get out of there. She turned to leave, but as her hand touched the door handle, the whisper came once more, this time directly in her ear. "Don't go." She whipped around, but again, there was no one there. Her skin prickled, and the hair on the back of her neck stood up. She shoved open the door and quickly stepped into the hallway, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The corridor was still empty, silent, just as it had been when she first entered. "Get a grip, Emily," she whispered to herself. "It's just the stress of the job. You're tired. It's nothing." But deep down, she knew something was wrong. Something was waiting for her in this hospital, and she had a feeling it was far worse than she could imagine. This story seems to be getting scarier, doesn't it? If you want more stories like this, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. This helps create even more scary for you. Emily's footsteps echoed in the hallway as she made her way to the nurse's station, trying to shake off the creeping dread that had followed her from room 312. She forced herself to focus, but the sensation of being watched, of something lurking just beyond her vision, never seemed to leave her. She reached the station, where her colleague, Linda, was sitting at the desk, sorting through some patient files. Linda was an older nurse who had worked the night shift for years. If anyone knew the ins and outs of the hospital's oddities, it was her. "Hey, Linda," Emily said, trying to sound casual. "Has anything weird been happening tonight?" Linda didn't look up from the paperwork. "Weird? You mean besides the usual?" Emily frowned. "The usual?" Linda finally looked up, a tired but knowing expression on her face. "The whispers, the flickering lights, the patients who don't sleep. You get used to it after a while. It's always worse on nights like these, when the moon's full, when the air feels heavy." Emily raised an eyebrow. "I didn't hear any whispers, but, yeah, the lights have been flickering a bit." Linda smirked, but there was no humor in her eyes. "Sure you didn't? Maybe you're just not listening close enough." Emily wasn't sure what to make of that. "What are you talking about? Whispers? Don't let it get to you, kid. It's nothing, just things the hospital doesn't want to talk about, things they've never been able to explain. Some people say it's the spirits of former patients, those who died here but never left. They say their souls still wander the halls at night." Emily blinked. "You mean, like ghosts?" Linda shrugged. "Ghosts, spirits, echoes, whatever you want to call them. Some people hear them, some don't. It's up to you whether you believe it. I stopped trying to make sense of it a long time ago." "Do you think it's true?" Emily asked, unable to hide the growing unease in her voice. Linda leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting to the old clock on the wall. "I think if you're here long enough, you'll see for yourself. I used to hear the whispers too, you know, but one night, I saw something I can't explain. After that, I just shut up about it." Emily's pulse quickened. "What did you see?" Linda's face hardened, and for a moment, she looked as though she were somewhere else, lost in her thoughts. "I saw a patient at the end of the hall. It was about 2:30 a.m. The lights were out, but there was this figure, this tall, shadowy shape standing in the doorway of room 404. I thought it was a patient at first, maybe one who had gotten up to walk around, but then I realized something." "What?" Emily whispered, leaning in. Linda's voice dropped to a near whisper. "The patient in 404 had died hours earlier. I had just checked on her myself. I'm telling you, Emily, some things here, they don't follow the rules of the living." Emily's stomach twisted. She had always been skeptical of ghost stories, always chalked them up to imagination or coincidence. But now, hearing Linda's voice soft, serious, she wasn't so sure anymore. There was something in Linda's eyes that made Emily feel like she was on the verge of learning something she wasn't prepared for. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed to life, cutting through the tension. "Emergency in room 207, code blue, immediate response needed," a voice crackled. Emily felt her heart leap. "I'll go check it out," she said quickly, pushing herself away from the desk. Linda's eyes followed her as she walked toward the hallway. "Be careful, Emily, the night's just getting started." The cold, fluorescent lights above flickered again, casting strange shadows along the walls as Emily moved swiftly through the hospital. Room 207 was located in the far wing, one of the older parts of the building. The emergency had to be serious. This wasn't a room typically used for critical cases. As she approached the door, she noticed a strange smell in the air. It was faint at first, like something rotten or decaying. She pushed the thought away and stepped inside. The room was dim, with only the soft beeping of the heart monitor to break the silence. The patient, an elderly man named Mr. Fletcher, was struggling to breathe. his chest rising and falling erratically. The monitor was flashing warning signs. "Mr. Fletcher, hey, can you hear me?" Emily rushed to his side, quickly checking his vitals. His eyes were closed, and he didn't respond. Emily called for backup over the intercom, but as she did, she noticed something strange. His hands, which had been resting motionless on the bed, twitched. At first, it was so subtle she almost missed it, but then, his fingers curled into a fist, gripping the edge of the blanket tightly. "Mr. Fletcher," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "stay with me. I'm getting help." But his eyes remained closed. It was as though he was fighting something deep within. Then, just as she turned to grab the phone, she heard it again, that same whispering voice. "Emily." Her head whipped around, but Mr. Fletcher's eyes were still shut, his face twisted in pain. The room seemed to close in on her as the whisper grew louder, more insistent. "Emily. Help me." She froze. The voice wasn't coming from Mr. Fletcher, it was coming from behind her. Her heart raced as she spun around, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, yet the voice continued, now in her ear, almost suffocating in its closeness. "Don't leave." Emily's hand hovered over the door handle, but she couldn't move. Her entire body was frozen, the air in the room thick with dread. "Don't leave," the voice repeated. "You're one of us now." Emily's hand shook as she released the door handle. The whisper was gone, but the chill in the room lingered. She glanced back at Mr. Fletcher, his shallow, ragged breaths filling the silence once again. He was still alive, but only just. She couldn't waste any more time. The code blue had already been called, and the hospital was sending another nurse to help. She needed to leave to meet them in the hall, but every part of her resisted. Her feet felt like lead as she slowly backed away from the bed, still glancing over her shoulder, convinced that any second, someone or something would appear. "Just get out, Emily," she whispered to herself. "You're imagining things. It's the exhaustion. Just go." But as she turned to leave, she saw it, felt it. It was a shadow, flickering just out of sight, at the far corner of the room. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't a reflection. It was a shape, tall, dark, and thin, standing just behind the curtain that separated Mr. Fletcher's bed from the rest of the room. For a split second, Emily thought she saw a figure moving, but when she blinked, it was gone. Her heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't breathe. It wasn't the usual feeling of being watched. This felt different. This was more sinister. Before she could react, she heard a faint sound, just a whisper, almost a hum, but so low it made her skin crawl. The words were indistinguishable, but they were unmistakably coming from the same spot where she had seen the shadow. The air around her thickened, suffocating her with an oppressive, cold weight. A noise behind her made her jump. It was a soft creak, the kind you hear when a door is slowly being pushed open. But when she spun around, there was no one there. The door to room 207 was still closed. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she slowly backed up, feeling the walls close in. She had to get out of the room, but as she reached the door, it slammed shut, so violently it rattled the entire frame. Her breath hitched in her throat. What the hell? She reached for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in. She tugged and twisted, but it felt like the door was stuck, or worse, like it was locked from the outside. She banged on the door with both hands, shouting for help, but there was no response, no footsteps, no sign of anyone coming. In the silence, Emily's own breath was deafening. Her chest rose and fell in rapid gasps. She wasn't alone. The whispering was back, and this time, it was louder, so close it felt like it was right beside her ear. "Emily." She spun around, her eyes frantically scanning the room. There, in the corner by the window, stood the figure again. This time, she could see it more clearly. It was tall, too tall, its limbs long and unnaturally thin. Its face was obscured, covered in shadows, but its eyes burned through the dark like cold, lifeless voids. "No, no, no, no. Help me," the figure whispered, its voice raspy and cracked. "Help me." I was one of you." The words made no sense. Emily's stomach twisted, her legs trembling with fear, but she couldn't move. Her body felt like it was frozen in place, as if some invisible force had gripped her, holding her hostage. And then, just like that, the figure stepped forward. It didn't walk, it glided, moving across the room with an unnatural fluidity, its feet never seeming to touch the ground. Emily couldn't scream, couldn't run, couldn't even blink. All she could do was stare as it drew closer, its face still hidden in the shadows. "I'm not dead," it hissed. "I'm one of you. You'll never leave." With a sudden jolt, Emily snapped back to reality. She screamed and pulled herself away from the figure, but as she turned to the door again, it was gone. She was alone. The room was empty. No, not empty. Her eyes darted back to Mr. Fletcher's bed. He wasn't there. The sheets were twisted, the bed empty, the heart monitor still beeped, but no one was lying in the bed. And then, as though on cue, the shadow reappeared, hovering just above the bed. But now, it was larger, more distorted, as if it had absorbed the very air in the room. "You're one of us now," it repeated in a voice that made Emily's blood run cold. She staggered back, her hands reaching for something to steady herself, but she couldn't find anything. The room seemed to close in on her, the walls shifting, warping, as if the hospital itself were alive. The lights above her flickered again, casting the room into a disorienting strobe. The air felt thick, too thick to breathe. "Help me." The whisper came again, this time from everywhere. It was no longer coming from a single source. The room was filled with it, the walls reverberating with a chorus of voices. "The door!" Without thinking, Emily ran to the door and threw herself against it, slamming her shoulder into the wood. The door flew open, and she stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. The whispers were still there, echoing in her mind, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. She turned the corner and made her way to the nurse's station, praying for someone, anyone, to be there. But when she arrived, the station was empty. Empty. No Linda, no other nurses. The entire hospital felt deserted, like it had been abandoned in the dead of night. The only sound was the faint hum of the intercom. "Emergency in room 207, code blue, immediate response needed." But Emily knew there was no emergency, there was no one left. As her mind raced, trying to process what was happening, the voice came again, clearer this time. "One of us." It was the last thing she heard before everything around her went dark. Emily awoke with a jolt, gasping for air as if she had just resurfaced from underwater. Her head was spinning, and her vision was blurry. She blinked a few times, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The cold, sterile walls of the hospital came into focus, but there was something wrong. Everything felt wrong. She was back in room 207. She had been standing by the door, escaping, hadn't she? She'd made it out into the hallway, but now she was here. Alone. Confused. Her breath came in short bursts as she sat up on the bed, her limbs heavy, like they had been drugged. The whispering had stopped, but the oppressive feeling in the room remained, thick and suffocating. She tried to stand, but the moment her feet hit the floor, dizziness overtook her again, and she stumbled back onto the bed. "You're here now," the voice. It was cold, distant, yet in her head. The words resonated through her skull like 1,000 echoes. She didn't have to look to know where it was coming from. The shadows in the corner were shifting again, just as they had before. They were closing in on her, warping, twisting. "No! Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. But it didn't matter. The shadows weren't listening to her pleas. The room started to shake, as if the entire building was groaning under some invisible weight. The walls seemed to pulse, like they were breathing. The lights flickered once again, and this time, they didn't just flicker. They blinked out, then back on, faster, faster, until the darkness seemed to swallow everything whole. Then she heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. "Help me." The voice whispered again, but this time, it was not just in her head. It was coming from the hallway. It was someone who had been through this before, someone who had been trapped here. The footsteps grew louder, and through the haze of disorientation, Emily stumbled to her feet again, this time more steady, more determined. She had to get out. She had to get out. She reached the door with trembling hands and flung it open, but there was no hallway. There was no nurse's station. No exit. She stepped into a pitch-black void, an endless stretch of hallway that she knew hadn't been there before. The floor beneath her feet was slick, like something wood had been spilled. The walls felt like they were closing in, and all around her, the whispering voices returned, louder this time, surrounding her from every direction. Emily, she spun around, the sound of her own name cutting through the dark. There, at the end of the hall, stood a figure. It was the same figure she had seen in room 207, the tall, dark shadow with burning, empty eyes. But now, its face was clearer. A twisted, half-formed mask, a grotesque mix of a human face and something far darker, like something not quite alive. "You're one of us now," the figure whispered. Its voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from somewhere far, far away. "We all are. Welcome to your new home." Her legs buckled beneath her. She collapsed to the ground, her body shaking with fear. She wanted to scream, but her throat felt tight, closed. The air in the hallway was thick, suffocating. She looked up at the figure. "What are you? Who are you?" The figure tilted its head, as though considering her question. Its shadowy form seemed to stretch, morph, and twist as it spoke again. "I was once a patient, just like you. Just like all of you. The ones who stayed. The ones who never left." Emily felt the weight of those words sink in like a stone in her chest. "The ones who never left," she repeated, a terrible realization creeping into her mind. The figure nodded slowly. "Yes. You've been here longer than you know. Every shift ends the same. Every patient is just another soul trapped in this cycle. And now, you're one of us." The whispering voices, a chorus of lost souls, filled the hallway as the figure reached out, its hands impossibly long, blackened and twisted. Emily could barely move, barely think. Her body was frozen in terror as the figure stepped closer. "You were never supposed to leave," it said softly. "None of us are." In a flash, it lunged forward, its hands reaching for her throat. Emily gasped, but there was nowhere to breathe, no escape. And then, everything went black. Hours later, the sun began to rise over the city, casting a pale light through the dusty windows of St. Thomas Hospital. The hospital was silent, eerily so, except for the soft rustling of papers and the faint sound of a monitor somewhere far off in the distance. The building had never felt quieter. The atmosphere was suffocating, thick with a strange, unnatural stillness. At the nurse's station, Linda sat alone, sorting through old paperwork, her face drawn with exhaustion. The night shift had come to an end. The first rays of dawn were breaking through the cracks in the hospital's long-forgotten walls. She reached for a cup of lukewarm coffee, her hands trembling slightly, though it wasn't from fatigue. She hadn't seen Emily all night. In fact, she hadn't seen anyone. No one had come to relieve her. No one had checked in on her. There were no new shifts. No new patients. And yet, she knew. She knew exactly what had happened. The whispers were gone now. But Linda could feel them creeping under her skin, just like they always did. She could hear them, even in the silence of the early morning. One of us. And she knew, just as she had known for years, that tonight would be no different. The cycle would continue. The shift would start again. And Emily would be here. Just like the others. Trapped forever in the hospital's walls. One of the lost souls who had never left. Don't forget to like, comment your thoughts on this terrifying story, and subscribe for more spine-chilling horror tales.